Welcome to Booked, where two guys tell you about the books they're reading. I'm Rob Olson.
And I'm Livius Nedden. This week we are going to be reviewing Dracul by J.D. Barker and Dacre Stoker. Rob, when you heard we were going to do this, did the names of one of the authors mean anything at all to you? Like, did it sound at all vaguely familiar, or?
You mean Dacre Stoker?
That one. That's
the
the one.
Stoker, because it was Bram Stoker who wrote Dracula.
Yeah. And how coincidental that we get another Stoker writing another Dracula book, right?
Well, that's what, because we did Dracula versus Hitler, and I think that was more because of the Hitler, So, I guess what I'm saying is I wouldn't just read any Dracula book. There'd have to be something that,
And anything versus Hitler.
Anything versus Hitler, yeah.
Yeah, Godzilla versus Hitler. Next week I'm booked. So this is, we're going to talk more about it, but this is a prequel to Dracula. I'm going to give you the bio for the one author, J.D. Barker, who, I kind of get the feeling that maybe he's doing a little bit more of the heavy lifting on this. Do you get that feeling too?
Kind of like the J.J. Abrams and Doug Dorst or whatever.
Yep. Kind of like that.
Yeah.
So here's the bio for J.D. Barker. He is the internationally best-selling author of Forsaken, a finalist for the Bram Stoker Award for Superior Achievement in a First Novel, and winner of the new Apple Medalist Award. His work has been compared to Stephen King, Dean Koontz, and Thomas Harris. His latest novel, The Fourth Monkey, released in June 2017. His third novel, The Fifth to Die, releases July 2018. He has been asked by the Stoker family to co-author the forthcoming prequel to Dracula, due out in October 2018. His novels have been translated in numerous languages and optioned for both film and television. Barker currently resides in Pennsylvania with his wife Dana and their daughter Ember. You would think it's been 12 days since this book is released that someone would update the bio. That hasn't been updated since middle of 2017, right? Yeah.
Nope. That was really confusing for a second when you said The Fourth Monkey and his third novel was The Fifth to Die, and I was like, oh, these numbers are messing with me.
It was not easy to read, and then reading everything in past tense, right? Because we're talking about, is going to be released in July of 2018, and it's a little bit challenging. Get on it, guys. I don't know how much time we could spend criticizing bios, and almost nobody listens. We've actually had a few authors listen and do a better job, but by and large, the authoring community is not taking heed of the wise words of wisdom we're providing on bios.
And it's free advice, so I don't know why they wouldn't. It's I don't know.
The other thing I wanted to say about this bio is he was just a finalist for the Bram Stoker Award, and here he is. Obviously you guys get the gist of what we're reviewing here, and you would think that would lend him a little more credibility, get him an actual Bram Stoker Award and not just be a finalist.
Those Stokers are pretty hardcore. So here, Dacre Stoker doesn't have an Amazon bio associated with this book, or I guess his other books, and so it was a little bit difficult. Livius went to Wikipedia, pulled some stuff out, and then just deleted it all. But really what you need to know is that he's the great-grandnephew of Bram Stoker, the person who wrote Dracula. So this is a blood relative of the original.
Fucking welcome to October.
Yeah, so that's what drew my attention to the book. Livius sent me a little thing, and he's like, hey, this is coming out. And I was like, oh, interesting. Usually I just say yes to everything Livius says, but it was easier this time because this was a blood relative.
Please always say blood like that, no matter when you're talking about it.
Will do.
Here is a lengthy synopsis of what we're going to be discussing this evening. The prequel to Dracula, inspired by notes and texts left behind by the author of the classic novel, Dracul is a supernatural thriller that reveals not only Dracula's true origins, but Bram Stoker's, and the tale of the enigmatic woman who connects them. It is 1868, and a 21-year-old Bram Stoker waits in a desolate tower to face an indescribable evil. Armed only with crucifixes, holy water, and a rifle, he prays to survive a single night, the longest of his life. Desperate to record what he has witnessed, Bram scribbles down the events that led him here. A sickly child, Bram spent his early days bedridden in his parents' Dublin home, tended to by his caretaker, a young woman named Ellen Crone. When a string of strange deaths occur in a nearby town, Bram and his sister Matilda detect a pattern of bizarre behavior by Ellen, a mystery that deepens chillingly until Ellen vanishes suddenly from their lives. Years later, Matilda returns from studying in Paris to tell Bram the news that she has seen Ellen, and that the nightmare they've thought long ended is only beginning. Bum, bum, bum.
Bum, bum, bum. And that's really like... That's the thing. We always read the synopsis and then we dive right into telling the exact same thing. So I'm going to make a note of a little bit of the way that the book is laid out. It does go between, what is it? 20... No, it's probably like 14 years, right? It's a 14-year difference in time.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
From when Bram is the ailing youth to when he is, he's like 21. Which I guess like then was like a full-blown adult, but now it's like...
It's middle-aged at that time.
Yeah. Which, by the way, most of the book takes place, I think, just a couple years after the American Civil War ended, so that's just a little perspective here. I always think of it as like ancient times when we're talking about like the 1800s and stuff, but really it wasn't that long ago. Yeah, so the book, I don't know why I made that aside. The book jumps from majorly the 7-year-old Bram timeline to the 21-year-old timeline for the majority of the book. So it'll go back and forth, but it also jumps perspectives sometimes, right? There's some different perspectives throughout the book.
Oh, for sure. There's probably 5 perspectives or so, and it's done from what I remember. And I read Dracula when I was 12 years old, maybe. But kind of the same way that does. A lot of it is journal entries. You know, somebody writing a letter to somebody is one perspective, and then a journal entry is another, and then there's just kind of like the omnipotent narrator for part of it, and then it goes back to somebody else's journal entry. So,
did you know there's a word for that?
No.
I discovered this when I was looking up information about the original Dracula book, and I'm going to probably pronounce it wrong, but epistolary, Epistolary, which basically means like a book written as a collection of letters.
Interesting.
Or like, I guess, diaries. Yeah.
That is interesting, and I guess it makes sense that there's a book. And I'm guessing that a lot of this probably... there was probably a lot more of this previously when people wrote letters and wrote diaries.
Yeah.
More often. I'm not trying to be funny. I just figured that now if you did an epistolary, it would be like Facebook posts and tweets.
Yeah.
A book filled with someone telling their story that way. DMs, maybe.
Yeah, totally. So, do you want to go through story a little bit? Or we could also kind of talk about, like... Because the obvious question is going to be, like, if this is about Bram Stoker, how much is it, like, rooted in fact or history?
So, let me start by saying that up until I read the epilogue... I was kind of calling just bullshit on this whole, and I will go back and read it, inspired by notes and texts left behind by the author of the classic novel. Yeah. So when I say that, I thought, oh, okay, well, maybe Bram Stoker had notes on a prequel. Like maybe he was like, oh, I'm going to dig more into Dracula's origins or something. You know what I mean? Because you get that. We've seen a few and even talked about a few books on this podcast where someone else has written the book based on... what was left behind by the original author.
Right.
There are claims made at the end of this book. How do I say this? There are claims made not in the epilogue, but in the afterword, I guess would be the right afterward.
Yes. Yeah. A non-part of the book.
That essentially that the story we're telling you is true and is really based on notes and stuff that they have found of Bram Stoker's original text, and quite interestingly, the missing 101 pages that were originally part of the story. So, a little bit of setup. When this was submitted to be published, there were 100 plus additional pages. and Bram Stoker submitted it as a true story. And through the publishing process, which we talked about on our last episode, on how this can work sometimes, the opposite happened. They said, listen, this is good stuff, man, but no one's going to buy this as a true story. So why don't you go back and rewrite it as fiction?
He was the OG James Frey.
Yeah, kind of backwards. But yeah, exactly. So yeah, if what Dacre Stoker and J.D. Barker say is true, then we are to believe that everything we are telling you from here forward actually happened.
Yeah. There you go. I believe it. Why not? I believe it.
All right. As far as the story goes, there's actually kind of a third perspective that I don't think you really touched on. And this was not very clear to me until 80% of the way into the book. So we go from 1868, when the bulk of the story happens, back to, as Robin mentioned, like 14 years previously, and then some cases even farther back than that to kind of address some local, myths, fairy tales, maybe part of the story, who knows. But we do see Bram Stoker's perspective. That's mentioned in the synopsis of him being in this room is a relatively small part of the story, but that takes place outside of what I would say is the bulk of the story.
Yes. Yeah. That first part of the synopsis that you read.
Yeah. That's actually maybe 10% of the book, if even that. So that's a different time frame too. So that's looking back on the things that are happening in the bulk of the book.
Yeah. So to give you an idea of some story, kind of like it mentions in the synopsis, one of the big chunks that we're introduced to, a lot of what we're introduced to at the beginning of the book is Bram Stoker as a child, and he was very sickly, and it's described in a way it seems like it's almost like like on his deathbed, like he never left his bedroom. He had like bouts of just like horrible, illness and pain and just not being able to move, no strength, blah blah blah, and treatments never really seemed to do much. But they had this I guess she's a maid, whatever you want to call her, like a servant, like a live-in kind of,
more of a nanny,
because they called her nanny. They called her Nana. So she was like a nanny is exactly what she was. And she, for some reason, when he was like at his worst, she would kind of lock herself away with him, and his health would boost up, and then she would have to go away for a few days looking very haggard, and then after a few days she'd come back and she'd look like her normal self. He'd be back to normal until after a while the illness kind of took over again. He'd get really sick, and then she'd do the same thing, lock herself away with him. He would bounce back. She'd have to go away for a while and kind of do some mysterious thing and come back looking like normal. And so that was the beginning of the book, is we're set up with a Bram Stoker who is very sickly and really realistically has no expectation of living very long. But this mysterious nanny treatment is doing stuff that even whatever medicine would be considered modern for the day couldn't help with.
Yeah, and I wonder too. So a couple things. Where this is supposed to be portrayed as essentially, based on a true story, right? I mean, that's the vibe that we get from all this stuff about it being inspired by texts and stuff. Okay. And yeah, I get it. These people lived in the 1860s, and we think like, oh, well, people just weren't as sharp as we are back then. I mean, or as we are now, which I don't believe. I think people have had the same level of like general intelligence, probably throughout most of time. Like, these people didn't find any of this weird, because the way that Rob explained it sounds super simplified, but no, that's exactly it. They're like, he'd get really sick, and then she'd be in there for 20 hours with him, and she'd come out looking 20 years older, and then she'd disappear for 3 days and then come back. And I get it. If you have a sick child, you probably don't give a fuck what makes the child better. You know what I mean? Like, if it really comes down to my child could die and weird shit happens, and then my child is better again for 6 months or 3 months or 2 months or whatever, like, you probably live with a lot. But yeah, like nobody's really terribly concerned about it. The only people that think this is weird are a 7-year-old and like his like 6-year-old sister.
Yeah.
So I don't. I mean,
yeah, it doesn't really raise an eyebrow. I guess well, first of all, like the family is massive, right? Isn't there like so? There's the mom and dad Stoker, and then there's Bram and Matilda, and then there's got to be like 3 other brothers and sisters.
Yeah, I think there are 5 or 6 of them altogether, and a couple of them just don't get mentioned like at all.
Yeah, so I mean, if I were those parents, like maybe I just wasn't paying much attention because also this is like not long after the Irish potato famine, and they lived in Ireland, so like shit was pretty rough for a lot of people. So I don't know, like maybe I'm just making excuses for them, but it seemed like they had a lot going on.
So the discovery of the weird shit that happens is all done through Bram and Matilda over the course of really just like a week or two when Bram falls to his most ill. Now, they already have some suspicions, but when Bram makes yet another miraculous recovery, him and Matilda go into full-on, like full-blown, like Nancy Drew Hardy Boys mode where they're going to figure out what's going on. And they discover some really disturbing things about Nana Ellen's habits. So they wind up following her, and they see some super, super disturbing things. And then that's capped off with, essentially the next day, Nana Ellen is gone. She has quit her job, moved all her shit, and she is gone for good from the family nanny. And then we venture forward 7 or 8 years. And this is mentioned in the synopsis, where Matilda has seen Ellen on the streets in Paris and noticed that she looks exactly the same. Creepy. So Matilda, Bram has let go. He has not been ill, and he understands that somewhere deep inside him, he understands that this woman did something to him that had an effect that not only made him whole, but he goes on to be successful, like in sports, in like school and college.
He's like Teen Wolf.
He doesn't get sick. He can see better at night than most people. All the things that would indicate to us now, a couple hundred years later, that he's probably some kind of vampire or something or another is happening with him.
Yeah.
But Matilda has never let go of this. So she has stayed on this since she was a kid. She's never forgotten. She's always tried to seek out answers. So she convinces Bram that they need to further investigate.
Yeah, and the way that she gets him on board is really cool because, like, Homegirl goes to the library and basically draws a connection between a death in the current day and a death from when they were like the age, like when Bram was 7, and calls Bram over to the library and basically lays out all the evidence and says like, hey, this is pretty much irrefutable proof that like something fishy's going on. And so they go to start investigating that and try and see what the connection is between this thing and the Nana Ellen who they think is making a comeback into their lives.
Thus, they engage the help of Thornley, one of the many Stoker siblings, who is a doctor who is facing his own challenges with his wife, who has taken ill over the previous months. And then the only other real character of mention, I think, is going to be Arminius Vambury.
For a guy named Livius to mess that name up.
I know. Arminius, I'm thinking, right? Arminius?
I saw it as Arminius.
Who is essentially, I'm just going to say it, he's essentially Van Helsing.
Yeah, that's exactly what he is. Yeah.
So,
like he's got all this know-how, but he doesn't share anything, but he's not fazed by anything. It could have been like he had 8 tentacles growing out of his face, and he'd be like, did you say 8?
Yeah. I've heard of this before. And then, he has some, so that, I mean, that's really the broad strokes of the story is that they are looking to track down, Ellen, and, Rob mentioned the deaths that, their comparisons drawn to from their youth and their current day, which is, has a lot to do with the O'Queeve family. I think O''Cuive family. and so on and so forth. And then it shouldn't be shocking, based on the name of the book, that another character, another historical fictional monster, may make an appearance in this book.
Yeah. One thing I want to mention, where they meet Arminius is at the Hellfire Club. Have you heard of the Hellfire Club?
I have, but I wasn't really sure what it was, so I did have to Google it. But I believe there have been books and maybe even movies made about the Hellfire Club.
Yeah, it was just like this weird, like, elite society of people that wanted to get together, and I don't know. It seems like they didn't really have a purpose except for just to be an elite club, like a secret society. Like, they would all get together and just kind of club it up, like drink, entertain each other, or whatever. But
yeah, it was like the ultimate like boys club, but for rich weirdos.
For rich weirdos, which I watch these YouTube videos sometimes just as like I'm eating dinner or something, just to pass the time. And it was one about, I can't remember, how weird the life of Benjamin Franklin was, and I think he was a member of the Hellfire Club.
Interesting. So, yeah, there's a pretty extensive Wikipedia article on a number of clubs, actually. So the Hellfire Club was a name for several exclusive clubs for high society rakes established in Britain and Ireland in the 18th century. And then there's a Duke of Wharton's Club, Sir Francis Dashwood's Club, Phoenix Society, and a couple others. But yeah, I guess that's it. But yeah, so he's a member of the Hellfire Club, and Thornley knows him from being a member of the Hellfire Club, but then also knows that this guy's into like weird occult stuff, and says, hey, he might be able to help. They actually go to him for a translation of a document that they found. Yeah,
that's it.
Yeah.
I forgot that. Yeah, and plot-wise, this is kind of where we run into spoiler territory, really. Like, the book is about these bizarre happenings from their youth suddenly come back into light in maybe a little bit more of a gruesome way in their adulthood. And as they're trying to like find the truth, it seems like what they're pursuing may also be pursuing them in a way, and we just get to see where it all plays out. So that's probably all we can tell you about the story.
There are some older stories that are talked about, and I'm going to talk about this in a weird kind of roundabout way. My favorite part of this book was there's a story about a young woman that pops up later in the book, which I think her story completely eclipses all of the current day story.
Yes.
Fucking fantastic. And I don't want to talk a lot about it, but every part of that story was just tremendous. And again, so much better than the story we're reading that includes that story.
Yeah. Would you consider it, would it be a fable? Or like a straight up fairy tale almost?
I mean, you and I both read the book, so I don't want to say too much. Yeah, I would say that's been passed down, and different people have heard that story. So yeah, fable I think would be probably a pretty accurate.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a great, and I wish I remembered the weird Irish name for it. I wish I had actually looked up to see if it was an actual fable or something that was made specifically for this book. But yeah, probably one of the most interesting parts of the book, most compelling, and I guess it probably has the biggest impact on the story overall, I would say, of everything. But yeah, there's a good reason Livius isn't telling you much about this fable.
Yeah, other than that, I mean, it's very much a Dracula story. I mean, it even feels like it has parallels to the Dracula story that we know. Essentially, a group of people all kind of banded together to fight the great evil. I will go on to say that the Dracula that's represented in this is very much the Dracula that we've come to know and love, or fear and hate, or whatever, however it is you feel about him, through modern society. And then, of course, it being the, quote unquote basis for the actual Dracula story. Those rules apply.
Yeah.
Very traditional, I guess, is what I'm saying. If you want to. Yeah.
Yeah, the style of it is very nicely like that classic Gothic horror that you would expect if you were reading older stories from around the time that Dracula was written. I feel like it was nicely, at least emulated that. It didn't feel like something that was written in a modern way. It had a nice historic Gothic feel to it.
I don't know if I have a whole lot of anything else to say about the story itself. One thing I do want to mention that I found, I don't know, interesting, and I don't believe that you could have caught this. Do you remember, man, a few episodes ago, maybe 6 months ago, we were talking, and I had mentioned that I read Carmilla, which was a vampire fiction that actually predated Dracula.
Oh yeah, I remember that. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It was like a Penny Dreadful or something?
Yes, yeah. They encounter that guy in this book. The guy who wrote it, Sheridan Le Fanu, is actually the author of Carmilla. So I believe he was also a member of the Hellfire Club, if I remember correctly.
That's awesome.
When they, yeah, but I was like, is that? I looked at the name and I was like, am I making? So I had to go. I was like, no, that's definitely him. So that was kind of a nice nod to the person that wrote a vampire book before Dracula.
Yeah, nice little tip of the cap.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that's cool.
So. Yeah.
So yeah, this is one of those things where like I don't think that we have enough substance for spoiler talk, but there's like a big kind of part of the book that Livius and I would love to talk to, but we don't want to spoil. So we're kind of in this weird middle area with that. But I do want to point out just a little bit about the writing style, because I think the book was very well written, and it had a good pace to it. It wasn't super fast. It wasn't like a page turner, but when I was texting with Livius, I told him it was, the word I used was engrossing. Like I really got engrossed in the story. And so here is an example of some of the writing, just to kind of give you an idea of what type of style you'd be in for. Just a little bit of setup. This is from the perspective of Thornley, Brahm's brother, talking about a person who was at a college that he knows well. As I turned the corner at the Royal College of Surgeons, I waved to Mr. Barrowcliff, feeding pigeons at St. Stephen's Green. One could set a watch by his regularity, for he stood there every day, come rain or shine. He was so punctual, in fact, that if you were to arrive before him, you could witness the pigeons gathering in wait at the shore of the lake near the small falls. I just thought that was so, like, that was wonderful, because the pigeons, like, the whole, like, the pigeons know to go there is such, like a backup for the fact that this person was punctual. It was just very well written, and just, like, this quaint, charming moment. It didn't need to be that elaborate, but it was, like, very nice set dressing for what was going on.
I agree. And yeah, the writing, you mentioned it, but it's very classic Gothic style. Like I said, it meshes really well from what I remember of how Dracula was written. I think they did a great job in that. I do want to follow up on something that we talked about, so I'm going to get this wrong. Diarg Du is the myth that I talked about for this book. The fable, whatever we decide to call it, which is, well, I can't say it's real, but it exists as a fable outside of this story. So it wasn't created for this story. It definitely exists. I mean, I only spent a moment kind of cursory glancing over the article, but it does seem to be in keeping with what we read in this story, which was definitely, for me, the shining gem of the whole thing.
It's good to know that that's like a real thing.
That's a thing. I don't know if it's as eloquently put in any of these different like wiki entries that exist for it. But I definitely love that. Character-wise, I guess I wanted to talk about one other thing. The two characters that really stood out for me were the women, Matilda, who was a very interesting character, and Ellen, who's the kind of catalyst for all this, as she's the, very obviously a vampire, right, from the synopsis and the not aging over 15 years and that kind of stuff. Man, Bram Stoker fell flat for me in this book. He was just so two-dimensional that I was really surprised. I mean, written by an ancestor of his, I thought he'd get a little more, a little more oomph to him, and I just found him to be kind of flat. I found almost all the male characters to be very flat in this book.
I agree. All around, I agree. And there's, without spoiling anything, I will say that there is something that we discover about Brahm's relationship with Nana Ellen. We discover it later in the book that we didn't know through like the entire reading of the book. And once you discover that, like, he's even less of a like compelling character because of like a, I don't know how to say it without spoiling anything, but like once we find out this one thing about Brahm, it's like, oh, dude, come on. So I liked him even less. Do you know what I'm referring to?
Yes, I agree with you. It was just, and I don't want to say it was disappointing. I just really, the more I read about it, the more, I don't know. I just felt like, I don't know. I guess if I'm going to write a story and the focal point is going to be my great granduncle, like, I'm probably going to dress him up a little better.
Yeah, and I guess that brings into question, like, is he really actually the focal point of this book? And it's easy to argue once you've read it that, like, he is not.
No.
So, probably, I mean, much like the book Dracula isn't necessarily about Dracula, you know what I'm saying? As much as it is, like, the collection of characters who encounter him. So, yeah.
Yeah. I'm about ready to go into wrap-ups, and now I kind of have a different outlook on this book. So, well, I'm going to go ahead and go first.
All right.
It's all the same to you. Mixed feelings about this book. I thought some of the characters fell a little flat. I'm not sure, and this is not, I don't know. I'm not sure how much I'm buying into the whole this actually happened to Bram Stoker. Probably more research is needed. Overall, I like that we're told that this is based on his notes and that maybe he thought he went through something like he goes through in this book, which, if you haven't gotten it yet, is that he flat out encountered vampires, Dracula himself, amongst a chorus of other undead folk. That being said, now that I've learned that my favorite part of this book is the Diarg Du fable, myth, whatever, it becomes a little harder to credit this story, the story that I'm reading, when I know that my favorite parts of it are rehashed from a different story, if that makes sense. I enjoyed it. I thought that it had the great Gothic horror feel. I thought that it was great in parts as far as chilling and disgusting and stuff. There's a portion of this book takes place inside a room. This mentioned in the synopsis, so there's no spoiler, where Bram is keeping a vampire essentially from escaping. So he's in a room where there's a locked door it's locked from the outside. But there's just this great scene setting where there's like 25 mirrors. It's every mirror they could find put up on the walls. And there's crosses, carved into everything. And he's throwing these white roses on the floor at the door. And he's made this cream, this paste out of holy water and some other stuff that'll help, do all this. And it's like this insane scene that every time they're in the room and talked about it, I could visualize it as this perfect, crazy setting. So there's a lot of great things in this book. But by far, the Diarg Du was my absolute favorite thing. It dragged a little bit for me. I thought it was longer than it needed to be. And I was really kind of disappointed in the Bram Stoker as a character. Apparently, I like Bram Stoker as an author and a creator more than I do as an actual person, or at least this representation of him. That being said, overall, I enjoyed the book a lot, and I'm going to give it, let's throw Rob some funky math so he has trouble doing this, 3.75 stars.
All right. I'll just make sure that my final rating brings us back to a full or complete number. So, in physical, like a paper book, I think this adds up to about 510 pages or something like that. Even though on Amazon it says something different. I was in a bookstore recently and I saw it, so I flipped open to the end of the book and it was like 512 or something like that. So not a short book, and it does not get off to a very fast start. So it is something that is kind of a slow burn, and it's interesting because I feel like throughout the entire book, there's that element of like Gothic, supernatural stuff going on to a degree, but at one point it just ramps up real heavy, and then it kind of like some more of the supernatural, unbelievable things, like your suspension of disbelief is challenged like much harder at a certain point, and then it just kind of stays that way. So there's a point where it just kind of takes off, and I liked that slow burn kind of like world building kind of stuff. I don't know what you call it, world building or whatever, that happened at the beginning, more than, hey, there's vampires everywhere kind of stuff that happened eventually. So to counter Livius a little bit, I will say that I'm a little relieved that Bram Stoker wasn't made into some like Indiana Jones like instant hero, when we'd always known him as a guy who wrote a book. To be fair, wrote several books, but obviously, find someone that can tell you another book by Bram Stoker besides Dracula, is what I'm getting at. So I'm glad that the character wasn't like some badass hero. I'm glad that it was just kind of this person who went through something and then later on felt compelled to get that story out into the world. To me, that rang a little bit more genuine than if he became some weird, like, he became like the Van Helsing type character. So that being said, I thought it had this very authentic kind of Gothic horror, historical fiction kind of thing. It was nice how they tied in little elements of history throughout, like using the Hellfire Club, and like Livius had mentioned, using the author of that earlier vampire text. I didn't know it at the time, but I appreciate the fact that like real history was built into this book. And much like Livius, I will say that it's nice that they're at least saying, hey, this really happened. No one's going to believe it, nor should they probably. But I think it's a nice angle to take, because basically, from what they say at least, that was supposed to be the original approach in Dracula, was using it as like an actual a non-fiction, like this is something that happened. So all in all, I found the story moved well. I liked the characters. I liked the way it was written, and there weren't too many things that really held me up. I will say I agree with Livius about his favorite part of the book, that Fable is the book in a lot of ways, and everything else is just stuff that needed to be done to make that part of the story work. And so it sucks that we can't talk about that, but if you're listening to this deciding whether or not you should read the book, the whole book is good, but that part is absolutely the best, and it has an impact on the way that the story plays out in the end that was very satisfying for me. And I think it saved it from being like a classic monster movie stupid ending, because I was really satisfied with what went down. So all in all, I really liked it, and I'm going to give it 4.25 stars.
I knew it. I was like, man, I could force him into a 4.25.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like that Blair Witch Project thing. So they show some evidence. Now, I was reading this on a traditional Kindle. Mm-hmm. You may have been able to see Stoker's notes better on your iPad, I'm guessing.
Oh,
because they actually had pictures of what are alleged portions, and they explain like how they were able to see these, how somebody, I don't remember who it was, actually at auction purchased an original, I don't know, whatever. So they somebody that had information that the rest of us are not accessible to. It's also interesting to hear that it was published in different ways in different countries, that essentially kind of like a raw shark texts kind of thing. Like if you get your hands on all of them, you have a bigger picture of what the original story was supposed to be. So I give him a ton of credit, and I mean, kudos, I guess. I don't know. Where do you go on this, right? So Stoker's great-great-grandnephew as a tribute to his great uncle, granduncle, would has paid some homage through this in his other works, because I think everything he's done, if I remember correctly, is all related to Dracula. Or if your last name's Stoker, is that just what you do? I don't know.
Well, wasn't he like a teacher, like a math teacher or something before?
I'm not sure.
I don't know. I was reading up on him a little bit. The thing that's interesting is before he wrote this book, he co-authored a sequel to Dracula called Dracula the Undead, I think. Did you know that?
I know his name has popped up a lot because, it's hard, it makes news whenever he does something, it makes kind of literary news. Here's kind of a list of things he's done. So there's Dracool under his credit. There is When Brave Men Shudder, the Scottish origins of Dracula. Powers of Darkness, the lost version of Dracula. Dracula the Undead, which I'm guessing is that sequel that you were talking about. Yeah. Dracula in visual media. You know what I mean? It's so essentially everything he's got credited to his name is kind of tied into it, to his blood, his blood ties to the original author. So
the thing that, all right, so I went to Wikipedia just to read like the summary of Dracula the Undead, because there's a synopsis which just kind of like teases it, but like the summary just basically tells you the whole story, like the whole plot. And the thing that was interesting about that is they're tying in, like, it seems like they were going Penny Dreadful style. They were pulling in any kind of Gothic reference they could get to. What's the Bathory?
Elizabeth Bathory.
Yeah. Like she's in it. And there's all this stuff going on. And it seemed like they were just like kitchen sinking, anything that could be like a pop reference for that time.
To be fair though, let's take their approach for a little bit, right? This current approach that Bram Stoker actually met this Dracula character, and it was involved with vampires. So now if you take Dracula as a real person, he might have had some interest in an Elizabeth Bathory, right?
Yeah.
Woman that's staying young by bathing in blood. Like if you were the guy, if you were Dracula, you'd have to be like, I gotta meet this chick.
Yeah, I guess like you would at least raise an eyebrow. That's true.
Yeah, you think about it happens so in modern day, right? You have celebrities reach out to other celebrities with like interests and work together on projects and stuff. So if this is the 1800s and you're a vampire, maybe you could do a little bit of reaching out. You're like, hey, let's see if we can do something cool together. Like, I will drink your bathwater.
Oh, wow.
Boom, there it is. That's how that book goes down. I don't even have to read it. Dracula drinking Elizabeth Bathory's bathwater.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I could just imagine that scene where Dracula's like flips open the paper and he's like, Renfield, why didn't you tell me that there's a woman who bathes in blood?
Yeah,
like
no joke.
Renfield's in the shit. He's got to eat bugs again or whatever.
Oh, Renfield. I'm surprised there wasn't a Renfield in this. I feel like there was a mention of someone eating bugs, but it was like a passing mention early on in the book.
Well, and the fact that Thornley worked in an insane asylum, I was like, oh, this is a perfect setup, like for like a Renfield type character.
Yeah, but they're alleging that that's true too.
Renfield?
Yeah, and that Thornley worked in in the epilogue and his wife did spend time there as a patient.
Yeah,
that's what you do. Yeah, I guess you're a patient in a mental institution. So at any rate, I'm really glad that we read it. It's a great way. It's our first book in October. I should mention that we're a little late this episode. You're supposed to get an interlude episode last episode, but Rob, you had some issues. You had to retire yet another microphone.
Yeah, I had this critical failure of my microphone. I don't know what's going on, but Livius and I recorded the previous episode that we did. I guess it would be the Katerina episode. And then a couple days later, we got back together just to throw together an interlude before Livius went on his impressive European vacation that I'm sure we'll hear about plenty of soon in a minute here. But and we get on, and I'm getting ready, and I'm setting up before we connect, and my microphone just wasn't turning on at all. And so I did a little troubleshooting, tried this, tried that, different cables, different ports, different whatever. Nothing at all. So I didn't have a backup microphone. I own another microphone. which is currently in Connecticut. I had sent it to a friend of mine because he had some recording stuff he wanted to do. And I was like, oh, I'm not using this one. Just take it. And I never got it back. So my backup mic doesn't exist. And so Livius and I tried a couple things and nothing sounded good. So we had to table that until Livius got back because I didn't have time to get another microphone before he left, sadly. But now I'm back. And I splurged a little bit. I don't know if I told you this, Livius, but as a little birthday present to myself, this microphone I have right now the whole setup is about $400.
Holy shit, I had no idea it was that much.
Yeah. Well, the mic itself is $199. And I think that I'd spent more on the mic I was using before, but since it's not a USB mic, I had to pay for like the board, the box setup and everything, and so it all kind of just started piling on, and yeah, it added up to about $380 or something like that.
Well, I'm glad that you splurged on yourself. I'm going to be really honest. Yeah. And it sounds really good. So
that's good. Yeah, if it may take a few episodes before like we hit optimal performance as I get everything set up and everything. There's new switches, but I am using, for anybody out there who likes the way this sounds, it is a Blue Spark, and this is like a studio microphone. It's got the XLR connection. It's not a USB microphone. So, yeah, there you
go. Happy belated birthday to Rob. We did not do an episode on his birthday, which I believe we've actually done before.
I'm sure we have, yeah.
Rob turned the big 4-0. How's life treating you differently now that you've moved into the beginning of your fourth decade?
It's really hard to say because I've basically put my life on hold. Like, I started a staycation on the 5th, and I go back to work tomorrow, so I had like 10 days off. So I have just been sitting in my apartment, like slowly cleaning things, like a little thing. Like one day I'll clean this, another day I'll clean that, and just like really haven't been doing a lot because you've been in Europe, and all my other besties are otherwise occupied. So I've just been kind of like relaxing. I have watched some stuff, so I'm sure we'll talk about me watching the Haunting of Hill House. But I'd like to, before we do that, I want to hear a little bit about your vacation.
So yeah, I went to I believe I mentioned this on the last episode, Paris and London for 7 nights. I'm going to keep it brief because I could talk for like 2 hours about all the cool things and all the weird and different things. I'll just touch on a couple of them. First of all, I know we have listeners in the UK, so I'm saying this as gently as possible. In the event that you live in London or around London and you have not been to Paris, I strongly encourage you to go to Paris. Infer from that what you will. I enjoyed my time in London, wow. But I fucking loved Paris. Now, I'm not at the point where I'm going to move there and write a novel that's going to burn down the world, but I'm probably not far from it either. Paris, wow. Amazing. Yeah. Paris was really sunny. Actually, Rob, I'm sending you a link right now. I do want to talk about a couple of the things that I did do while in Paris. The top thing that I did in Paris was I went, there's a newer, apparently it's only been around for like a year. There is a digital light museum, and some of you guys may have seen this because the way I found out about it just popped up as like a sponsored link on Facebook or someone shared it or something. I'm going to try to do this justice. L'Atelier des Lumières, I believe is how you say it, which is I don't know what that was. Yeah, it's like the Museum of Lights or something like that. I just sent Rob a link to their website. It is an old converted warehouse where they have set it up to do projections floor to ceiling on what are probably 20-foot high ceilings, and they project on all of the walls and onto the floor, and in some cases there's a little area where it's projected onto water, and there are a couple of little rooms that you can go in and be surrounded with this digital artwork that's constantly evolving and moving. Look it up online. Definitely watch a video of it. It is stunning. And if you're ever in Paris, it is probably I spent my best hour in Europe in this place. I could have sat in there all day and watched. There were either 3 or 4 like installations that changed. So one of them would run for like 15 minutes, and the next one was like 8 minutes, and then another one for like 20 minutes or whatever. And I literally probably could have stayed in there for 5 or 6 hours just watching them. They were stunning. And apparently they change occasionally. There's a new one starting in January that they're going to add, I think, to part of the existing rotation. So if you can do that, the music is perfect. And it's this huge place. If you watch the videos online, clearly the videos were made when there were only a few people in there. It gets much more packed than the 15 or so people you see on their website. But totally worth it. And definitely I was going to say a once-in-a-lifetime experience, but I get the feeling that we're going to start seeing this replicated in other parts of the world. Hugely successful, shows sold out, the day of, not necessarily a whole lot in advance, but the first day we went, it was sold out. But we were able to acquire tickets for the following day to a show that was sold out by the time it started, and so on and so forth. So definitely something that you should see if you're in or around the Paris area. The other thing is much older than that, and that's the Paris catacombs. Are you familiar at all, Rob, with the Paris catacombs?
Not personally, but I'm aware of. Yeah, I'm aware of them, yeah. A lot of bones.
Yeah, a little bit of bones. So apparently there are over 6 million skeletons entombed, I guess is probably a fair word, but displayed in an underground labyrinth is the only way I can really describe it. The majority of it is still closed off to the public, but you can walk for what I have to guess is probably about a quarter mile to a half mile, about a half mile worth, where you're just literally walking through rooms completely made out of bones. It's odd because I actually mentioned to Rob before, I don't know where all the pelvises are. Or like the chest bone, the sternums. It is a ton of skulls and then longer bones. I don't remember seeing like any finger bones, which is a little weird too. So yeah. But like I said, it's really it's a ossuary, I guess is the actual term for what it is, which is where you display bones. But
like my ossuary that I have in my house. I forgot about that. Yeah.
It's a very surreal feeling. So it's way underground. I don't know. We probably had to go down, if I had to guess, 150 steps to get there, down there. And then you walk through a long winding corridor that is not made of bones until you get there. And they have an audio. You get these little like walkie-talkie. They essentially look like old Nokia phones. And you get to a certain place and there will be a plaque on the wall that says, track 1. Then you push it, and then someone explains to you what it is you're seeing or what you're about to see, and then they'll tell you to switch to track 4 or whatever. But definitely the two coolest things by far that I saw while I was in Europe.
Nice. So projectors and bones.
Dude, yeah. So for sure. But then there are weird, quirky things, too. So, like, the things you don't think about. Like, you think to yourself, like, I'm sure everyone's had this thought, right? Like, in France, they probably don't call them French fries, which is totally true. But you can walk into a grocery store and find bread.
They're pommes frites, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
But I was in a grocery store, and I saw bread, like the kind you would make sandwiches with, like Wonder Bread, essentially. And it's labeled American sandwich bread.
Because it's not a baguette, is that?
Well, yeah, because it's the bread that we use in America to make sandwiches, and it's labeled as such, American sandwich. Like if I say, Rob, hey, can you pick up a loaf of bread? You're going to walk in, you're going to buy butternut or Wonder or whatever it is that you prefer, right? But yeah, that's American sandwich bread. It's not just bread.
Maybe a little Pepperidge Farms if I really like you. Yeah.
Bread there is, and I'm telling you, it's no joke. I probably saw 50 different people just walking through the streets with like the long loaf of French bread in their hand.
Yeah, the baguettes,
Yeah, it was amazing.
Just throw a little butter on there.
Yeah, and then they have... I saw this in Paris and in London. In both places, I saw stores that were labeled as American stores. Like in London, we saw an American candy company, which when you walked in was, the stuff you buy at 7-Eleven here.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So There's an American food store I saw in London, and apparently, now I'm not a big cereal guy, but I think that the Europeans think that that's all we eat is cereal because they had like walls dedicated to nothing but cereal. So yeah, there's some interesting quirky things. But I will tell you, if you live in or around London and have ever driven a car in London, you are far more courageous than I could ever be. Spent a lot of time taking Uber in London, which was terrifying. Not just because of how weird and windy like their streets are. Like I can't explain it to you. I'll have to show you when I see you in person. But the streets are really weird. They all drive on the wrong side of the road. And even after 3 full days, I couldn't stop being terrified every time someone turned into what I assumed was the wrong lane and we were going to be killed. But the weirdest thing about it, so in the United States, for international listeners, it is expected that you park your car on the side of the street in which the traffic of the direction you're going in goes. Right? Yeah. So here we drive on the right-hand side of the street. Yeah. There are no rules for how you park. So like at first glance, because I'm not used to the roads being the wrong way, I couldn't tell just by looking at cars because they just park on whichever side of the street they feel like, which is bizarre and seems kind of dangerous because that means they have to cross like oncoming traffic to get back in their lane when they leave. If they're, parked on the opposite side. Yeah, there's just so many weird things, man. I can go on and on and on, but it was definitely an enjoyable trip. I imagine I'll be returning to Europe. I mean, I believe we're going to be in Europe for StokerCon 2020 anyway. But yeah, and if there's any argument out there, I can solve the argument. The metro also better than the underground. So wow. Sorry, UK friends. I will tell you that is also the case. Metro cheaper and more efficient than the London Underground.
I'm a little shocked. I never expected you to like Paris more than London, but I want to say that had we thought about this a little bit more, you had an opportunity to experience one of the biggest delicacies of the show Twin Peaks, which was the brie and butter sandwiches. Remember when the brother Jerry, Jerry came back from Europe and he was like super excited about these sandwiches? Yeah.
So I will tell you, I did not have a brie and butter sandwich, but I did have a sandwich that was like ham and butter on a sandwich.
Yeah.
Yeah, butter on bread in a sandwich is definitely something that we've missed out on with our American sandwich bread.
That's great.
Yeah, I mean it was definitely a good trip, and I did get to do and see all the touristy stuff, maybe not all of it, but the Arc de Triomphe and Notre Dame, and we were in Montmartre, I think is the right way to say it, which is the highest point in Paris, which looks out over Paris. Yeah, it was so a lot of super touristy stuff.
You didn't go to that Père Lachaise cemetery where Jim Morrison's buried?
No. I did go to one cemetery. We had some time to kill, so we did walk through one cemetery, and that was some pretty cool stuff to see there. No, I don't believe there was anybody famous entombed there. But then again, I don't know a lot of famous French people. The other thing I was going to say is I was also witnessed a protest.
Nice.
So I'll briefly tell this story. We get off the metro to go to the catacombs, and we had been there the day before, so I was a little familiar with the area, but the line was like 3.5 hours long. So anyway, we bought skip the line tickets for the next day and get off, and I look one way. We get off the metro, and I go, oh, it's kind of weird. There's just like 5 cops standing on that corner, and like 2 of them have riot shields on. They're wearing helmets. I go, this is a little weird. It's like, well, maybe it's an X. I look around a little bit, and I go, well, there's nothing very obvious happening. They're just standing there. So I go, that's a little weird. And as I'm looking at them, I turn around and almost run into like 15 more riot police. So these are, I forget the name, but they're essentially like the National Guard version. They're a military branch of the police. And there's a huge protest. Protesting the current president, Emmanuel Macron. I think I'm saying that right?
Yep.
So they were the like advance squad. Like they knew which way the protest march was going, so they were kind of hanging out for when they got to that area. Nothing broke out that I saw, but in watching the news later that evening, apparently there were fights and tear gas and some altercations with the police and stuff prior to them getting to the location that we were at. So that was a little intimidating. We saw, I mean, it was thousands of people, man, marching through the streets. It was a lot, and they were all very peaceful and very organized and whatever, when we saw them. But it's a little intimidating, especially when you're not familiar with what's going on.
Sure.
It was interesting because you could watch the locals who couldn't even be bothered to like raise an eyebrow at what was going on. So you could definitely tell who the tourists were, because they're the people who are all super antsy and like taking all kinds of pictures of the riot police and stuff. So yeah, it was definitely an interesting experience.
Well, protests are like baseball or apple pie for France. Like, it's the national pastime, I think. So you probably witnessed like the real culture of France by being adjacent to a protest.
Yeah. The other thing they think about Americans is that we're all into sports. Every time I came up to we're American, someone mentioned football or baseball or basketball, or it was
You're like, no, I'm an American in Paris. Obviously I like books.
Yeah, I did go. Oh, book related. I went to Shakespeare and Company.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it was very brief because it's a bunch of paper books, but it was very cool to be there. It was super busy, so it was very crowded and super busy. It is a neat place. It's a weird place. It's not like a bookstore like you'd think about being in a bookstore. Here it's a lot of weird little rooms and alcoves and low ceilings and narrow walkways, and you go up like a couple steps and you have to turn left to get into another room. So it's definitely not the equivalent of like a Barnes and Noble. Books stacked so high that they had little ladders everywhere. Like if you had to get something that was on, like a really high shelf, but then the next room would have like a really low ceiling. So it was like cobbled together. Seemed like from maybe even more than one business. Like it started out in one room and then like expanded maybe.
Yeah.
But it was neat to be there and to see that. And yeah, it large part American books there. So definitely another kind of tourist attraction. If you want American books in Paris, that's definitely the place you want to be.
Did you play the game?
I was not aware there was a game.
So the game. Oh, the game. I thought there was like a common thing for people who are in like the book life is you go through, when you're going through a bookstore, you keep an eye out for either people or like obviously for me it would be like people who we've talked to on the podcast or we've reviewed, like familiar people, familiar names, familiar books.
Gotcha. I honestly had a little bit of a time deadline. So I was probably only in that bookstore for about 10 minutes. But it was something I was able. Yeah, it was something I was able to get to. And like I said, it was really crowded, and there are times where I had to wait for people to move to get past them.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was. I mean, I'm not saying I wouldn't like to have spent more time there, but I feel like I got the gist of.
You got what you needed.
Yeah.
The game. I love playing the game. When I went to Austin. We went to that one. Oh, I can't remember the name of it, but like that one bookstore, and I was like, "Oh, I know that person. We reviewed that book. It's always fun." Oh, there's Paul Tremblay, like that kind of thing.
Gotcha. Yeah, I do that. Just not in Paris.
That's okay.
I'm totally gonna go back to Paris at some point.
Well, there you go. I know this is going to be a long episode, but I thought it would be cool. I watched a little bit of... Actually, I watched the entire season of The Haunting of Hill House. We're going to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, keep it spoiler free, man. I'm like 3/4 of the way through episode 1. I was able to download that on my spotty internet while I was in France. It dropped while I was in Europe.
Uh-huh.
So I did the Netflix download and managed to get 2 episodes on there, but did not manage to watch the entirety of the first episode on my way back.
I binged them all like in 10 straight hours last night, so I was up pretty late. And it's just a great... So like I won't say anything about the story. People will know that there is a Shirley Jackson book, The Haunting of Hill House, that this was inspired by. And I guess it's not really spoiler to say that it doesn't follow the story of the original book. It's kind of its own thing, and I think it borrows elements from. Have not read the original book, and that's one of those like, oh God, I hate saying those things because it's like a classic and it's like a worshipped, book and everything. But I have not read it. Here's what I will say. It is a little bit of a slow burn at the beginning. But man, like, there's the acting is incredible throughout the whole season. And, there's this one episode 6, when you get there, basically like you're looking at what's going on with his family from like the perspectives of different people one at a time. And then episode 6 gets them all together for like the whole episode. And it's just like incredible how they do that. But, yeah, it's very well acted. The cinematography is great. Just the whole design of everything. So like, it's a very well written, well acted, and it's a very beautifully shot and beautifully designed series.
From what I've seen, I agree with the things that you're saying. I was kind of wondering how that worked, and this isn't so much of a spoiler because it comes up like 15 minutes in the first episode, but I was wondering about that because it's a time thing, right? So it's a then and now.
Yeah.
It's this family, I don't know, 25 years ago, maybe 20 years ago. I don't know what the specific time frame is, and then them now. But I was like, oh, one of them wrote a book called The Haunting of Hill House. I wonder how this plays into the original.
Yeah.
So
it's not the Shirley Jackson story, because that was like, I feel like it was, if I remember the synopsis correctly, there was people going to this house for like a sleep study or something like that. It was a group of people. They weren't related or anything. And then other people showed up randomly, and just everybody was affected by the house. And in this one, it's a guy buys this house to like renovate it and flip it, basically. So he takes his whole family to live there just for a few weeks while they, renovate the house, and then he's going to flip it. And in that time, whatever the house, whatever happens in the house happens in the house. So it's a different structure of a story than the original. But I think it borrows characters or like impressions of characters from the original book. And since it's an ongoing series, I'm wondering, where it's going to go. Like if there's going to be more after this season 1.
I'm also embarrassed to say that I've never read any Shirley Jackson. I mean, we do have a podcast where we can rectify that.
Yeah.
Just saying. I know it came up. Listeners don't know this, but it came up. We potentially were going to one of the books that was in the queue, so to speak, was Shirley Jackson's We Have Always Lived in the Castle. Yeah, We Have Always Lived in the Castle. Yeah. Was the one that came up, which has also been adapted into a movie. So who knows? You may see Shirley Jackson in the near future on Unbooked. It's a throwback best of kind of episode.
But I will say, anybody that was on the fence about watching this, I feel like the quality of the show is up there with like my obsession with Hannibal or Penny Dreadful. Like I feel like it's that high caliber. And it's probably more approachable than those particular stories. So that's nice.
Yep. I like what I saw of it. And depending on what my schedule looks like this week, I plan on getting through, definitely before Halloween, getting through all of it. Which leads me to Halloween. That movie comes out on Friday. You know what I'm doing Friday afternoon, like right after work?
Watching Halloween?
I'm going to go see Halloween. Probably like 2:30, 3 o'clock, whatever that closest showing is to that, when I can cut out of work an hour early or so and go catch that.
Yeah, that's going to be nice. I kind of forgot it was Friday, but I'll probably go see it. If not Friday, then like the first showing on Saturday or something like that. So I can be a wimp and like go out into the daylight after I get done watching it.
Oh my God, really?
I just like first matinees. I don't like having theaters with people.
Yeah, it's unrelated, because everything we've mentioned has been very strongly kind of horror to this point. But Bohemian Rhapsody, I think, comes out the following week, so I'm gonna see more movies in the theater in the next like 3 weeks than I have probably collectively in the last 2 years.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, that's exciting. I thought you were going to talk about. I thought you were going to go right to what we're reading next.
Oh, if I knew what that was, I would totally do that. Well, I don't know what we're doing next week, but I know what we're doing very soon, which is an adaptation. It's so weird. It's so weird to say this, right? Because things are usually adaptations of books. an adaptation of a podcast, a serialized podcast. Alice Isn't Dead.
Yeah.
You listened to Alice Isn't Dead, didn't you, or no?
I started it. It's one of those.
Okay.
So I guess the problem for me with fiction podcasts is that I get distracted by driving, and then I missed a part of the story, and so I always get a little bit thrown off by those. So like I didn't get too far into it, but I did start that one. It's by Joseph Fink, who created Welcome to Night Vale.
Jessica
Nicole.
Nicole, that's it. Jessica Nicole is wonderful as the narrator and 99% of the voiceover in that. I listened to the first season. I did not listen to season 2. I started it, but I only got like one episode in, and then one of those things where I kind of forgot about it. It's the Netflix days, man, right? Like if it's not all available for me to listen, I get really excited for the first one, and then I forget about it by the time the second one comes around. So but yeah, I'm excited to read the serialization of that. I'm planning on completely reading it in my head in Jessica Nicole's voice. For anybody who's not familiar with her, I believe what she's best known for was her role in Fringe, which I'm sure Rob is going to throw out the name of her character in a second now.
Astrid Farnsworth, of course.
There you go. She does a wonderful job in narrating that podcast. So if you want a taste of what you'll be hearing, we're not sure. That's probably going to be 2 weeks from now, I'm guessing. I don't know. We're not sure when that's going to drop, but it's going to be soon. We have advanced reader copies en route.
Yes, sir. That's all I've got. Welcome back. Yeah. Welcome back to the USA.
Thanks. There should be a Halloween episode coming up, maybe.
Hey, fingers crossed on that. That would be nice.
Yeah, so we'll see if we can throw that together, because we haven't missed one yet, I don't think, since we started. So
yeah, we can't do it now.
But that wraps it up for this episode of Booked. Until next time, I'm Livia Snedden.
And I'm Rob Olson. Keep reading and drinking blood.